Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury just released recently, and on a whim I decided to download it a few hours before launch. It's a refreshing spin on 3D World's format, and I've been enjoying it so far. However, the game's release really made me think of a different topic I've pondered for about years now: the Wii U. For those in the know, it'll be no surprise when I say that the Wii U was a failure. The console launched in 2012 and lasted until it was discontinued in January of 2017. During that span, Nintendo sold a total of 13.6 million consoles. 13.6 million sounds like a pretty large number, until you compare it to both the Wii U's predecessor and successor. The Wii sold 101.6 million consoles, and their current system, the Switch, has sold 63.4 million in just around 4 years on the market. So yeah, the Wii U failed, and it failed really, really bad. But how did Nintendo respond? Well, as you saw from the Switch's current sales, it's clear that they responded well. But it wasn't just the console alone that helped the big end bounce back. It's been a long and strategic road from the Wii U's disaster class on the market to the Switch becoming the 12th best-selling console ever to date. And Nintendo wants you to forget everything that came in between. I was excited when the Wii U came out in 2012. The Wii had become a beloved console, and the next jump from it could only have been the next best thing to come out of gaming. Or at least that's what most people thought, as when the Wii U launched, many of its detrimental components were clear early. The console itself was pretty plain, unlike the GameCube or the N64, and while it shared its namesake with the Wii, it didn't particularly resemble the Wii to really have an identity. Throughout the U's entire lifespan, the system only came in two colors, black and white. Even the Wii had more variants than that. Then it was the elephant in the room, the Wii U gamepad. Nintendo had really emphasized that its new controller that featured a 6.2-inch touchscreen would be the main selling point and innovative in the industry. But in reality, it was large, weird, and annoying. The battery life wasn't good, and while it was wireless, you couldn't even leave the room your Wii U was in to play the gamepad. The Nintendo 64 thrived off of its 3D graphics and multiplayer capabilities. The GameCube focused on its unique design and the move to discs. The Wii changed the game completely with motion controls and accessibility. But the gamepad was just a clunky tablet with a controller attached, and tablets were already commonplace. Nintendo systems never could go head-to-head graphically with Sony and Microsoft each generation, but the other charms of their consoles would always keep them in the race. Against the Xbox One and the PS4, there was not even a chance the Wii U could compete. And knowing this, Nintendo tried to tap into other markets, specifically the mobile game market, seeing if they could leech some sales off of the success of little kids playing games on their phones and tablets. It didn't work, so they failed in two markets. Another issue was one that had been known of Nintendo for years at this point: the lack of third-party support. Sony and Microsoft thrived knowing that their platforms were loaded with titles that tended to every gamer out there, from AAA first-person shooters and sports titles, exclusive franchises, indie gems, and underground platformers. There was so much diversity. On Nintendo's side, it was much more isolated from the rest of the industry. Their consoles were always aimed for kids, and their games were always family-friendly. And Nintendo had always been very picky of what titles they would allow on their systems for decades, going all the way back to the 80s with the NES. But it had never been as bad as it was with the Wii U. When it launched, there were a few titles that seemed out of place for the console, with Nintendo putting in effort to have a variety at launch, but they all flopped, and not much more came from third-party publishers because the console was so incredibly difficult to develop for. So, like usual, Nintendo had to carry off the console with the strength of their first-party properties, and while everything else was mediocre, the big end still made some fantastic games. Throughout the Wii U's life, Nintendo's IPs had a lot of great titles. Mario Kart, Zelda, Donkey Kong, Smash Bros, and Pokemon all had big releases under their belt during the era. The console launched with Nintendo Land, but later bundles would include games like New Super Mario Bros. U, Super Mario 3D World, Mario Kart 8, and The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker HD, as well as Splatoon. Splatoon was the newest IP from Nintendo at the time, and it arrived on the Wii U. The game itself was high-paced and refreshing Nintendo take on online shooters, and I'd say it was one of the three most important titles to the Wii U. The other two in my opinion are Super Mario Maker and Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, aka Smash 4. Mario Maker and Smash 4 both had a tremendous impact on the gaming community for an extended period of time in the late 2010s. Splatoon had won Best Shooter and Best Multiplayer at the 2015 Game Awards, Mario Maker had won Best Family Game, and Smash had won Best Fighting Game the year prior. Despite all of the accolades that Nintendo had racked up from their titles, there was still a noticeable gap between the Wii U and its competitors. The games that were being put out were great, no doubt, but it was clear that the strength of Nintendo games by themselves just wasn't enough to persuade consumers to invest in a Wii U. Nobody had a Wii U to play these classic installments. Going into the end stage of the console, it was clear Nintendo was focused on the next stage. By the time the Switch was revealed, most people had already believed that the Wii U was dead. The company had to reassess their approach to console creation to understand where they can breed success in this new time in gaming. Like I pointed out earlier, the Wii U failed because it just didn't know what lane it was in. Its aesthetic wasn't new or creative and just harped upon the previous generation. The gamepad was awkward and didn't do diligence to the idea that Nintendo had for the console, and the library of games were limited due to the company's history regarding third-party titles and the difficulty it took to develop for the console. Going into the Switch era, Nintendo addressed all these problems to a T. The Switch itself feels like a perfected version of the gamepad, which was a failed handheld console in itself. The Switch is truly the first major console that functions as both a handheld and a home console. The aesthetic is new and doesn't rely on the past to establish an identity, finally giving off a feel that there is really something new being done. And most importantly, they open the floodgates to third-party developers, which has produced a lot of shovelware on the Switch's eShop, but nevertheless allowed many franchises fans would never even thought sniff a platform like Nintendo. The innovation was there, the support from developers in the industry was there, all that was left was for the new first-party games to be produced for the console, and that's where Nintendo struck strategic gold. Look at the best-selling games of the Wii U. Do you notice something? 9 of the 19 games here can be played on the Switch true to form. 6 more have follow-up titles already on the Switch in the first 4 years. Nintendo realized 2 things going into the Switch's lifespan. 1, that they had a lot of great games on a console nobody bought, and 2, they didn't have much time before their competitors entered the 9th generation of consoles as well. So what did they do? They ported their games, and they did a lot. It saved time to port rather than make new titles for all these IPs in the first few years. It gave developers more time to create new projects, and it likely will extend the lifespan of the Switch by a few years. It was easy to sell too, because fans already loved these titles, and adding a little extra so Mario Kart 8 and Pikmin 3 could become Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Pikmin 3 Deluxe rejuvenated the title just enough for it to seem new and shiny again. And if you were like myself, who owned a Wii U in many of the games, you still brought it because the Switch was just so much better and you didn't want to go back to the Wii U to revisit these amazing games. It was genius. And if you look at the sales numbers for the Switch, all it did was add more numbers to the existing sales for these titles, because technically, it's the same base game. It's how Mario Kart 8 finessed its way to being the 10th best-selling game ever in history. And knowing that was already out was what people wanted, only made it easier for Nintendo to know what new games to get out first. Splatoon 2 was out not too long after the Switch's release, and Smash Bros. Ultimate arrived only 4 years after Smash 4, when the previous wait between Brawl and 4 was nearly 7. Nintendo had hit the nail on the head and came out the gates running in 2017 and 2018, and it paid off because during that time, they really held their own in market shares, outselling Microsoft and the Xbox. But while it was the clear goal of the Switch itself to bounce back from the previous generation's failures, the games being put on the system by Nintendo makes another goal seem pretty obvious as well. They want you to forget the Wii U. It's no doubt that the Switch eclipsed the Wii U. It's no doubt that the games that were ported over are just as good, if not better, on the Switch. And it's definitely no doubt that Nintendo made infinitely more money from their early business decisions for the console. But in that same vein, I think it's important to remember the Wii U. The console gifted the gaming world with many wonderful titles that are still being played today for a reason. And aside from the games, the Wii U was important to the manifestation of the Switch itself. And if not for the Wii U's failure, Nintendo would have never seen what they needed to do to adjust and deliver the best version of their next generation idea. So every time I sit down with my Switch to play a game like Pokken or 3D World, I thank the Wii U. Its contribution shouldn't be forgotten. And if you take anything away from this loosely constructed rant I formed from playing a kid's game, that it's okay to fail. Failure is part of life and part of innovation. Acknowledge that failure and use it to find success when you try again, just as long as you put in the effort to get back up and bounce back. I'm gonna go back to playing Bowser's Fury. Thanks for watching.